Okay. I declare this meeting open to the public. I welcome all members to the 74th meeting of the Public Accounts Committee in this mandate. Can I also advise all members that the committee meeting will be broadcast and recorded throughout Parliament buildings and online. However, there could be a delay between public and private sessions, so please be patient with the system. Can I also advise anyone who will be joining us in the public gallery they are welcome to use the mobile devices, provided that such devices are in airplane mode or all devices are muted. You can connect to the assembly Wi-Fi and the password is provided for the Wi-Fi on the gallery rules, and it is not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting today. The agenda as follows. We have apologies from Cahill Boylan, but we also have John Burrows, who will be joining us later, and online we have Gemma Dolan, who will be joining us as well. Item 2 is the draft minutes, and refer members to a copy of the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of May 2026 at page 6 of the meeting pack. If members are in agreement that that's an accurate reflection, I'll sign the minutes for publishing. Members content?
Yep.
Okay. Also, members, it's important to remind everyone to ensure that they've considered the full agenda for the meeting and that any relevant declarations are made early in the meeting to ensure that they are recorded in an open session. Can I ask if any members have any relevant declaration of interest to declare at this moment?
Yeah, Chair, thanks. Just APS to Communities Minister.
Okay, thank you.
Please, thanks.
A member of the Economy Committee.
Okay.
Chair of Communities, and also bringing forward private members' bill on homelessness.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, members. Chairperson's business. I just want to put firmly on the record our appreciation as a committee to the Northern Ireland Audit Office for hosting us last week for the Brian Wally training session. Hopefully members found it worthwhile. It is always good to visit the Audit Office and to see where and how they operate, and also to engage with the team. So I just want to put on record our appreciation to the Audit Office for that, and to the CNAG, and of course to our committee team for organising it as well. Agenda item 5, members' matters arising. Can I refer members to a clerk's memo, pages 15 of the pack, and a response from the Executive Office Accounting Officer at page 17 regarding the inquiry into major IT projects. Can I ask members if they have any comments to make? Members content that the committee write to the accounting officer as outlined in the clerk's memo?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, members, correspondence, agenda item 6. There's correspondence regarding the conditions of a Northern Ireland Housing Executive House. For your attention, further correspondence from a member of the public at pages 23 to 40 of the pack concerning environmental health concerns and housing conditions of a Northern Ireland Housing Executive House, which the committee has been copied into. Can I advise members the matters raised relate to an individual housing case which members have previously considered, as it does not fall within the remit of this committee and is not connected to any current inquiry. I propose the committee simply notes the correspondence and members' content. Okay, there's also correspondence regarding SPPG. Can I refer members to correspondence from a member of the public at pages 41 to 44 in relation to the response time to a Freedom of Information request from the Department of Health Strategic Planning and Performance Group. Can I advise members that the correspondence concerns an individual Freedom of Information request, as this matter falls outside of the committee's remit and is subject to separate statutory processes? I propose that we also note that correspondence. Content? Okay. And also, members, I think, given the nature of what has been requested, we write to the member of the public explaining the committee is not in a position to intervene in individual cases or individual freedom of information requests, which are subject to separate statutory processes, and the committee can therefore take no further action in this regard and advise on the appropriate organisations the individual should contact. Content?
Yep.
Okay, members, we'll now move into closed session for the oral briefing by the Department for Communities and the Memorandum of Reply on Homelessness in Northern Ireland to look at recommendation 8. Thank you. Okay, members, we're now back on live broadcast. and we are on agenda item 8, which is the inquiry into Northern Ireland's energy strategy, the evidence session. For members' reference, the Northern Ireland Audit Office report is at page 75 of the pack. The Audit Office paper is at page 119, corresponds to the Department at page 127, dated the 4th of June, which includes an action plan 2025 report and an action plan for May 26, and a paper on electricity consumption and renewable energy generation dated the 4th of June. Members agreed to defer any discussion on the correspondence to the end of the session, as the priority for the committee today is obviously this important matter. A ministerial submission is dated the 20th of May at page 182. There's correspondence to the Department for Economy, included the details of our witnesses today. The Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce position paper, Energy Transition Building Momentum with Common Purpose, is also at page 187. I take this opportunity on behalf of the Public Accounts Committee to welcome you, Mr. Snowden, as the Accounting Officer for the Department of Economy, Richard Rogers, the Head of the Energy Group for the Department of Economy, and Anne-Marie Khan, Head of Energy Strategy and Corporate Services Department for the Economy. Those joining us in the public gallery are also very welcome to today's evidence session. Also in attendance today we have the Controller Auditor General for the Northern Ireland Audit Office, Dorina Carville, and colleagues, and Stuart Stevenson, Treasury Officer of Accounts for the Department of Finance. You're all very, very welcome. Mr. Snowden, thanks very much for agreeing to attend the committee today. I do hope we are on track. Members have quite a list of questions relevant to the matter at hand. With that said, there is a number of pressing issues. The session today follows the publication of the Controller Auditor General's report in October 2025 on the Northern Ireland Energy Strategy. The strategy for Northern Ireland, entitled Path to Net Zero Energy, is the central policy of the Northern Ireland Executive to ensure that it meets its obligations in relation to net zero, energy efficiency and tackling climate change, while also delivering affordable, secure energy for citizens and business. The strategy, published in December 2021, is to provide the framework for the departments to meet their legal duties under the Climate Act Northern Ireland 2022, to exercise their functions in a manner consistent with achieving net zero emissions by 2050 as far as possible. The Department for the Economy has been tasked with leading delivery of this strategy. The Controller Auditor General's report concluded that while the energy strategy was well consulted on and developed, its implementation has been fundamentally flawed. The report highlighted that though the energy strategy sets 3 clear headline targets, the annual energy strategy action plans, the ESAPSs, did not align actions to these targets, and many actions were vague, not time-bound, or lacked measurable outcomes. This represented a fundamental design weakness. Across the ESAPs for 22-25, a total of 74 actions were identified. Many actions were delayed, rescoped, or abandoned, and incomplete actions were often not carried forward to subsequent plans. Some actions regressed, for example, domestic energy efficiency schemes. The report states the department did not demonstrate a clear line of progression from action planning to delivery, and the report also highlights a series of issues around monitoring, reporting and targets. Today, the committee needs to be assured that the Department for the Economy can and is addressing the issues raised in the Controller Auditor General's report. The committee will need to see clear evidence that the department is capable in leading implementation of this strategy to ensure that Northern Ireland meets its obligations on these important energy issues. Members will be seeking detail of progress made since the publication of the report. I'm concerned that there appears to be little in the May 2026 action plan presented to the committee of detail around expected outcomes and timeframes, which we will deal with today. And as always, we would appreciate clear, direct and candid evidence from each of you today. So with that said, you are very welcome, and I'll invite you, Mr. Snowden, to brief members on anything you'd like to raise. Thank you.
Okay, Chair, I'll just make a short opening statement. As you've alluded to, the long-term vision of the energy strategy published in December of 2021 is self-sufficiency and affordable net zero carbon energy that will support economic growth in Northern Ireland. To deliver that vision, we will need to reduce the amount of energy that we use, make sure that our energy comes from renewable sources, and massively increase the size of our low-carbon and renewable energy economy. This will be the biggest and most far-reaching change in our energy system here since rural electrification in the 1950s and 60s. It's one that could potentially deliver up to £10 billion of investment into Northern Ireland over the next decade. However, many of the things that we need to do will involve new technologies and approaches that have not been tried or tested before, and many different people, organisations in private businesses, in the public sector and local communities have strong interests in how that change should be delivered. That means the change process is complex as well as being a very large-scale endeavour. Real and sustainable transformation of a complex system like that takes time. We agree that we need to get our governance arrangements right. We need to build consensus on how those changes will be implemented and achieved, and above all, we need to ensure that the interests of consumers are not adversely affected while we make that transition. The Department has been and will continue to be very active in driving that transition forward. Since the publication of the energy strategy, we have changed the policy in grid connection charging to remove financial barriers to new developments and to ensure fairness in how costs are applied. We have published a detailed design for the rollout of smart electricity meters in Northern Ireland. We have produced the Offshore Renewable Electricity Action Plan. We have introduced legislation to the Assembly to ban onshore petroleum exploration and extraction. We have delivered £73 million in energy efficiency projects in the public sector, which are delivering annual savings of £10 million in energy costs and 12,000 tonnes per year in carbon dioxide. And we have introduced the Energy and Resource Efficiency Programme to support business decarbonisation. The report comments on progress towards the three main targets of the energy strategy. The most recent statistics show that we are making progress on those targets. Overall greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector are down by 47% compared to 1990 levels, putting us well on the way to achieve the target of a 56% reduction by 2020. Energy efficiency, the most recent figures from this month show that we are now close to 15.6% towards the target, with further increases expected as additional data comes in for the past 2 years. On renewables, the most recent figures show that 48% of electricity consumed in Northern Ireland is from locally generated renewable sources. And in the green economy is now worth a little over £1.5 billion per year, making the sector worth more to the Northern Ireland economy than either tourism, which is £1.2 billion, or the life and health sciences sector, which is £1.3 billion. And that places us well on track to achieve the target of £2 billion by 2030. Now, while a lot of work has been delivered since the energy strategy was published, and we can take a degree of encouragement from these figures, we are still only part of the way through the process of transforming the energy system, and the Department is not at all complacent about the challenges that we face if we are to achieve the strategy's long-term vision and the targets for 2030. That's why I welcome the Audit Office report at this midway point in the strategy's delivery. It's made an important contribution by focusing our attention on what we need to do and setting these action plans to ensure successful delivery of the long-term vision, and I look forward to discussing the findings with you. We have accepted the Audit Office recommendations and we've already implemented them. I'm sure you'll want to discuss how that manifests itself in the 26 Action Plan, and my colleagues and I are happy to answer any questions the committee members have on the report and the Department's response to it.
Thank you, Mr. Snowden, for those opening remarks, and thank you for keeping them brief and succinct as well. The Audit Office report noted the Department employs 134 staff in its energy group, and over £107 million has been spent on energy-related activities since 2020. How much has been spent in total, and how can you assure this committee, given so little has been achieved to date, that this represents value for money?
Okay, so the £107 million was the figure towards the end of last year when the Department, when the Audit Office published its report, and the figure is not substantially higher than that now, as we were not able in the past financial year to continue with the energy efficiency scheme, which is the largest single item of expenditure for public sector properties. The funding has not been allocated to the Department. The 130 plus staff in the energy group, around half of them are dedicated to working on the energy strategy. I would say that the most recent figures show that we are making substantial progress, I think, now towards those targets. And at the time of the Audit Office report, the information wasn't available to the same extent. So it is understandable that there would have been concern that having spent money on that scale, only has seen 1% movement towards, for example, the energy savings target. But now I think as more data is coming through, you're able to see that we are making more significant progress. I would say that on each of the schemes that we do, there is a robust and detailed assessment on those. Value for money is a key consideration in every one of the programmes that we deliver. And if we were to take individual schemes, I mentioned in my opening remarks the energy efficiency programme for the public sector, the energy management strategy. I think there's clear evidence of value for money there. £70 million of expenditure, delivering £10 million a year of savings of the public sector energy bill, and that will be savings in perpetuity and repeating year on year. I think that means there's a payback of 7 years on that investment, and out of a bill of around about £215 million per year in public sector expenditure, that's a 5% reduction. So I think we can demonstrate that there is value for money. We would like to do more if the funding was available, but there are ample evidence there, I think, of achieving value for money for that expenditure.
And just for clarity, you said that the current figure isn't much more than 107, but just for the sake of the public record, how much has been spent?
I'm going to have to come back to you in writing on the precise number. I'll venture a number, but it would probably be not entirely accurate. I don't want to say something that's mislead the committee, but around about 110 million, I think.
Okay, and you can clarify that. That's appreciated. And I think from your response to the question I've raised, would it be fair to say you're strongly arguing that there is value for money in relation to this so far, then?
I would say that we believe, whenever you look at the figures and the progress that is being made towards those targets, that the expenditure is delivering results.
Yeah.
On our energy supply sector, for example, the greenhouse gas reductions in that particular sector are the largest of any of the sectors in the Climate Action Plan for Northern Ireland and the climate change budget at 60%. In fact, demonstrates how with our interventions we are driving down those greenhouse gas emissions and we are making significant progress.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Mr. Sohn, your department has a history of failure in relation to energy projects, and notably RHI, and we all know the impact that had. The report raises concerns as to whether the department has learned any lessons from how RHI was handled, and what assurances can you give this committee that your department is capable of successfully delivering on an effective energy strategy for Northern Ireland, and that there remains a credible pathway to achieving the 2030 targets within the remaining timeframe?
Okay, well, one of the principal criticisms of the RHI scheme was the lack of proper expertise brought into the department to address those issues. And so one of the key things I would point to is that in the energy group we have brought in additional staff with particular expertise. So we have secondees in from the private sector, energy companies. We have brought in people to deal specifically with certain aspects of the energy strategy. For example, we have set up a particular project on delivering the 80% renewables by 2030, and we have a new senior official brought in specifically to the department to deal with those particular issues. So we've learned that lesson around expertise. I think another lesson that we would have drawn from it, although paradoxically this is one of the things that the Audit Office identifies as being a potential flaw in our delivery so far, is that you need to spend sufficient time ensuring that you understand what it is that you are proposing to deliver, and that requires us to undertake detailed analysis and consultation on some of the things that we're proposing to do. Quite a lot of the schemes that we would wish to deliver, especially in areas like renewable electricity, biomethane, hydrogen and so forth, could involve substantial sums of money. And we need to understand precisely what the costs would be, who would bear those costs, and how that would be funded, in order to be sure that we don't fall into a similar kind of trap that happened with the RHI scheme. So therefore, that's why we go through the process of having the call for evidence, for doing the detailed analysis work and producing the consultation documents.
Thank you. And Mr. Rogers, could you give a bit of an outline as to what your role is within this energy section of the department? And do you believe whether, as someone who heads it up, whether the department is capable of successfully delivering the strategy?
Okay, so Chair, I came into the department in 2017 to head up the RHI task force. The permanent secretary at the time said I was working for the Strategic Investment Board, and I'd been working ironically on an energy efficiency programme for the Executive Office, as was the OFM-DFM. On the eve of the strategic outline case being signed by the Minister, the RHI story broke on Spotlight, and then the outline business case was not signed by the Minister at the time. So I understand the implications of not getting things right, because that hit really hard on the energy efficiency programme that had been clearly identified as being important. But I came into the RHI task force, which was set up to fix, and the reason that I was asked to do that, I believe, is because I had the expertise, having worked for around 30 years in the utility industry, and I was currently employed in the public sector, and I came in to head up, and it was absolutely obvious to me from within a few hours of reading the background that the simple flaw in RHI was that we were paying people more on the tariff than it cost to produce the heat. But it's like a butterfly flapping the wings. The implication of that was a massive hurricane elsewhere, and it's taken a long time. It's taken us from July 17 to now the summer of 2026 to get to a position where we're in equilibrium again, because we're now close to getting, as you'll be aware, members, and close to getting the primary legislation across the line, and the regulations follow, and we will have the regulations for closure payments. And for the first time, and I know it's hard to underestimate this, first time we actually have a constructive and positive relationship with the Ulster Farmers Union and the trade industry, which had completely broken down at the time when I came in. And it took, the fact that it's taken a long time and so much expenditure exemplifies why it's really important to get things right in the first place. So my role is to lead the removal of fossil fuels from this country. We've relied on importing fossil fuels for hundreds of years. It is an energy revolution. It's easier said than done, because the majority of what we do is import petrol and diesel and heating oil and natural gas, and we have to do it right, because I've just explained on the RHI, if we don't do it right, then we can hurt society. So we've taken our time. Sometimes people say we don't move fast enough, but it's like the swan. There's an awful lot of activity going on below the surface, and certainly talking in the teams, Anne-Marie and I and others, senior members of the energy team, we recognise we need to communicate better. We need to be able to explain to people out there, consumers and communities, what we're trying to achieve and why it's the right thing to do. So my role is to provide the leadership. We are making significant progress, and I have to say, when the audit office team came in, it was to be a 3-month piece of work, and it took 12 months because this is a very complex area. And I think we got to a place with the team, and Seamus is here, of accepting, as the PermSec said, what the report said, because it's a very complex area where we're trying to eventually, and this is by 2050, stop having to bring in any fossil fuels. But just to be clear, we have to do it in a way that keeps costs down to consumers, and some of the perceived inactivity to date that might be perceived comes from we want to act in a way that keeps costs under control for consumers. So, for example, to take an example, and we'll finish with this, we reached a peak of renewable electricity at 51%, and the trend was downwards to 43%. We know why the trend was downwards to 43%, because we did the right thing by consumers here and for the health of people. So we maximised the imports of electricity from Scotland to bring lower electricity into Northern Ireland. That displaced locally produced renewable electricity. And secondly, we closed the coal plant at Kilroot because of action by my team. In closing the coal plant at Kilroot, we brought dramatic savings, and as the PermSec pointed out, we lead the way in all the sectors in the climate action plan. we have seen a significant reduction in emissions from 5.3 million tonnes to 1.9 million tonnes. We're starting to get into the point of diminishing returns. And that's because we closed the plant. But at the same time as closing the plant, we had to use a bit more gas in the gas plant because of the way the technology works. So we knew we were heading to 43. But the important thing is we know why we've moved back to 48. And we have a clear line of sight of how we move from 48 back into the 50s to record levels and into the 60s. And people have chastised us and said, well, you're never going to make the 80%. That 80% is important because it's a target in law. But the most important thing is we aim to get to 100%. And when we get to the 31st of December 2030, whatever the number is, we will endeavour to get to 80%, but the next day we will move further because the ambition is to get to 100% because we need to pay a fair price for the energy we produce locally. We have to stop. So in only the 4.5 years of delivery of the energy strategy, we've had 2 cost of living crises inspired by fossil fuels over which we have no control. So getting to 100% is what we need to achieve, irrespective of whether it's about emissions. It's about doing the right thing by consumers, societies and businesses here.
Do you believe the 2030 target is achievable then?
Well, what we have to do as officials is understand what can be achieved and do our best to achieve it. And so that's what we are doing at the moment. You know, I'll give you one example. So the North-South Interconnector, which has been around quite a while, and as you know, is subject to a little bit of opposition, and there are ongoing legal proceedings. The construction of the North-South Interconnector has started up here, but the target date of 2028 has been moved back by EirGrid Sony to 2031 because they're slightly behind down south. Now, we need to get the North-South Interconnector built because it will, one, dramatically reduce the cost of electricity here, and 2, it will increase the amount of renewables in a step change way. So our target in the strategy was 70%. The target that the Assembly voted for in the Climate Change Act was 80%. And the step change of the moving back of the interconnector to 2031 makes it more difficult. Yeah? But in 2031, when the connector comes on, then there will be that step change. So there are a whole range of measures. I can't predict what we can achieve exactly in 27, 28, 29 and 30, but the direction of travel is in the right way, and it's been done in a way to get the right price for consumers to keep it as low as possible.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring in Gemma Dolan, MLA, remotely. Gemma, you can hear and see us okay?
I can, Chair, yeah. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
Gemma.
And thank you for coming in. Sorry I can't be there in person. But I just have 2 quick questions. So given the challenges identified in the 2025 midterm review, are you confident that the strategy can deliver its 2030 targets? And what are you doing to address those challenges?
We'll take each of the targets in turn. So Richard's addressed the renewable electricity target. I think that is the one where we would possibly feel least confident about it, in part because of what Richard had said about the North-South Interconnector and the significant impact that would make, by some estimates potentially adding up to 9 percentage points on the renewable consumption targets for Northern Ireland. There are a number of things that we need to do. We need investment in the grid, which has already been started by Northern Ireland Electricity Networks, which will allow easier firm access for new renewable generators to come on stream. We have made a number of enabling actions. So there's a new planning policy statement which supports renewable electricity. The grid connection policy makes it more financially viable for new renewable electricity to come on stream, and we've produced the bill for the renewable electricity price guarantee scheme, which would allow us to put in place the support scheme for renewable electricity as we move forward. Then there are other things that will need to be taken forward with Sony, the system operator, NI Networks, and the utility regulator over the next 4 years to make sure all of those pieces come together and are manifested in an increase in the renewable electricity targets. One of the major things we can do is called grid optimization at the minute, and this is where the investment in the grid is important. We have a surplus of renewable electricity generated to the west of the province and a limited capacity to transmit it across to the east where the higher demand is. The investment in the grid will allow more of that electricity to be used, and therefore we will be able to produce more of our or consume more of our electricity from the renewable sources that are available. On the energy savings target, the the picture's a bit clouded by the fact that there's such a lag in the production of the statistics. We're quite dependent on statistics produced by other public agencies, which then can take up to 18 to 24 months to be available. So the figure that we have at the minute, the most recent one, isn't even the full figure for 2024. We're still waiting for two components of that. But I think that over the past number of reports, you can see that the amount that we're moving in that energy savings direction shows that we are making strong progress, and that as additional measures come on stream over the next few years, you'll start to see that number rise quite rapidly. And then on the low carbon renewable energy economy piece, I think we'd all be pretty confident that that £2 billion will be achieved and probably exceeded by 2030.
Thank you. And sorry, Ian, just on the statistics, do you think that will be ironed out by 2030? You know, will you get the information by then or before then, obviously?
I think that by the time we get to 2030, we'll be working with a figure which will be only partial. So we'll have probably full information up until 2028, but still be missing some information for 2029.
Okay.
So there will be a gap there. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, sorry. Given the limited progress against the targets to date, how were the major spending decisions assessed against the energy strategy's headline outcomes before the funding was approved?
Okay, so the single largest piece of expenditure was the energy management strategy in the public sector Invest to Save scheme, which was £73 million in total has been spent on that to date. Obviously, that's directly linked to the energy savings target. So that will identify, in the assessment process, that identifies the amount of savings that are delivered from that course of action. Some of the other projects, for example, the geothermal demonstrator project, obviously again what we're looking to there is energy saving targets in the long term, because all forms of heat pump type technology, including from geothermal sources and ground sources, is more energy efficient than fossil fuel sources. But that's it's a demonstrator project, so that's a number of years down the road before you start to see at scale developments on that site. But we need to be able to test the technology to make sure that it is actually viable and usable. And we've had very positive results from the two major sites that we're doing, one at the Stormont Estate and one at Greenmount College in Antrim, which show there's tremendous potential in geothermal energy in the right locations in Northern Ireland. But that piece of work on the demonstrator project will not have a direct delivery implication for the three main targets, but it is an important part of preparing for the energy transition.
I could add one more point. Under the energy management strategy for the public sector, we delivered the energy and carbon data repository, which is a system basically that is, again, really outstanding. Up until then, information of how much electricity, gas and oil we used in the public estate was really lagged, and part of the issues we've been talking about. But now we've implemented a system through that which has over 4,000 government public sector sites on it, and every time an invoice is raised by a gas supplier, an electricity supplier, by an oil company or by an LPG supplier, it automatically comes into that system. Energy managers right across the government estate have discovered lots of things that have allowed them, despite the fact we haven't been able to allocate Invest to Save capital, they've been able to find out more about what they're actually spending on energy and also provide the data reporting for emissions. And so, things that, people like health managers and education managers discovered they were using electricity where buildings were empty. So it's that kind of thing where they have at their fingertips that has come as a consequence of the delivery of the energy strategy.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair. That's my questions.
Thank you, Gemma. Just before I bring David Honeyford in, I'm just listening to a lot of the detail that has been shared. Is the pace presently sufficient to meet the 2030 target? And we've talked about the amount of money that's been spent and the numbers of staff that are based within this section of the department, but is the pace going in the right direction or not?
I'd say I've been in the department 2.5 years now, and it's very clearly my my assessment that the energy group is probably the busiest part of the department in terms of the sheer volume of things it is currently doing simultaneously and the amount of work that's being produced. And also the complexity of the work, I think, is probably in excess of what's happening in other places. Not to say that other parts of what we have to do are not challenging and complex, but I think the sheer volume and pace of stuff that we're delivering is quite remarkable. And that will be maintained over the next 4 years.
Thank you. David Hungerford.
Before I go to my questions, I want to pick up a few things that have been said, because this is important answers that have been said that I don't want to a report that follows. You've said that, you said 9%, if the North-South interconnector was there, you would increase the renewables by 9%. We already have a connection to the South, so what's the percentage of renewable energy in our target from the south of Ireland that's counted today?
I don't have that figure off the top
The
of my head.
answer is zero, Ian. The answer is zero, because you've just said that 9% increase, renewables counted where it's made, not in imports.
No, this is to do with how the electricity supply across the whole Ireland is transmitted from one place to the next.
80% target is what Gemma was asking you about.
Yeah.
Can I?
Right, can I finish the answer?
Yeah.
Okay, so the North-South interconnector will allow much more transmission of electricity from where it's required to where it's needed. Our figure is about the amount of renewable electricity consumed in Northern Ireland, not the amount that's produced in Northern Ireland. It's actually a much more challenging target than renewable energy production is. And so this is what the North-South interconnector will allow us to do, is move some of the non-renewables, fossil fuel generated electricity south of the border. That will help us with our figures on what is the renewable capacity that's consumed here.
Okay. It was also said there a second ago that, the energy strategy was in 2021, okay? You've talked about progress, you've talked about significant progress, you've talked about substantial progress, you've used the word progress so many times. 51.6% of renewable energy was in 2021, it's now 48. Tell me how that's progress.
Well, Mr. Rogers has explained that already. So the two major things that have caused that to happen. The first is the closure of the coal-fired power plant at Kilroot. Now that has had the impact of placing more of the the non-renewables generation capacity onto the gas plants. We have minimum generation requirements for those gas plants to maintain system stability, which are slightly higher than the coal plant was. So that means at your base load, you have to have more of the fossil fuel generated electricity in the system to start with. Now, the benefit of closing down the coal plant, as Mr. Rogers explained, was the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and also the cost to consumers. So that is one component, and it's a significant one, and we knew it was going to happen. The second is that since 2021, the price differential, and I think you had evidence about this yesterday at the Economy Committee, price differential in wholesale prices between the single electricity market in Ireland and the electricity market in Britain has increased to about 20%. So their electricity is cheaper. And in order to make electricity cheaper for consumers in Northern Ireland, we maximise the amount of imports through the Moyle interconnector. Those imports do not get counted, even though they may be renewably generated in Scotland, do not get counted towards the renewable figures here. They are treated in the figures as if they were fossil fuel contributions.
Exactly the same as the ones in the south, which we were talking about, the interconnector. The Moyle interconnector has been there from 2001. So don't pretend that the Moyle interconnector in the last 4 or 5 years is the reason why that go.
I'm sorry, Mr. I'm going to have to correct you on that point. It is very clear that we've been maximising imports through the Moyle interconnector over that period of time for price reasons. The interconnector flows in two directions. Yeah. So if the electricity was cheaper here, it would be sold to Britain. But it's not at the minute. There has been a price differential has increased since 2021. Those figures are pretty clear and demonstrated in the information provided yesterday. So I think it's completely wrong for you to say that what has happened over the past 4 years has got nothing to do with the interconnector.
Right, we'll have the figures then for the interconnector walk, because the interconnector went back the way to 500 megawatts in 2021 from here to Scotland. But whenever the NIO report, it talks about the action plan lack measurable outcomes, linked to targets, lacked milestones, and didn't have proper performance. So why should we have any confidence in the 2026 action plan that's any different?
We would accept that there were flaws in the way the previous action plans were produced. And if you look at the action plans each year since 2022, you'll see that they have changed in the way they've been presented and the way that the actions have been framed. I think in the first one in 2022, certainly there was a number of over-ambitious targets that we really ought to have been a bit more careful to make sure that they could actually be delivered. And I'm sure we'll talk about the detail of some of those specific actions, like the non-domestic energy efficiency scheme was one that was proposed to be launched in 2022, which we weren't able to do until 2024. I think that it is also fair comment for the Audit Office to say that some of the targets were not specific and were not outcomes focused, and it is quite difficult to then have a binary was it achieved or was it not achieved assessment. Now, we have substantially changed over the years and improved how those targets are produced. If you look at the action plan reports that have been produced in 2023, for a variety of reasons, not least of which was that we didn't have a functioning assembly at that time, we weren't able to pass legislation or progress policy, then only 2 of the 13 actions were capable of being completed in the course of that calendar year. In the year just passed, I think it was 14 out of 19. So we are picking up the pace at which we deliver those actions in the course of the year. I won't say that we've got it perfect in the 2026 action plan. We are continuing to learn how best to frame these things. What is very clear to me, I think, from looking at all of this and reflecting on what the Audit Office report says, is that while we are doing a lot of work and we're delivering a lot of things in relation to the energy strategy, we are not getting that message across, and people are not clear about what's being done or how it's been done, or, and I'm sorry to use the word again, the progress that we're making. I think that is something we substantially need to improve on. On the question of whether we could have had milestone and interim targets in the action plan, I would say that in 2021, we have seen 2 wars which have caused energy price spikes. We had a period of time when the Assembly and the Executive were not functioning. In addition to that, we've had a change of government in the UK, and there have been at least 2 significant changes in energy policy direction in that period of time. So it has not been a stable operating environment for us. I think it would have been incredibly difficult for us to predict in 2021 what would have happened at every year between then and 2030 and introduce interim targets and milestones. Having said that, we do know that there is a need to explain what it is we're going to do. You've made this point numerous times at the Economy Committee and elsewhere, Mr Honeyford, that we need to be very clear about what it is we're going to do to achieve these targets. That's where we've fallen down. So we will be producing an energy policy statement by the Minister later this year, which will set out each of the most significant things that we need to do between now and 2030 in each year in order to deliver against those targets.
Talking about the 2026 action plan, so many actions have a specific completion date?
Well, all of the actions are to be completed in the course of the current calendar year. They're all to be done in 2026.
All of them will be completed in 2026?
That's what we're aiming to do. Now,
okay.
Say this, that's our intention, is to try to complete all of them in 2026. I cannot predict the future, so I can't say with absolute certainty that all of them will be done, but that is what the intention is.
Why is there no date on the action plan? 2024, 2025, all of them just are a list of stuff. Why is there no date? Why is there no completion date on it?
Just because they're to be completed in 2026.
So the measurable outcome is all of those are delivered in 2026?
That's what we are aspiring and aiming to try to achieve, and that's what the work we're putting in is directed towards doing.
Okay. Can I ask who signed off the document that doesn't have any real targets or deadlines in it?
For the record. So the document clearly says these actions will be achieved in 2026. It says that. They'll stop. So I signed it off,
with respect, in 2024, the one said there would be...
the 2026 document says that these actions that were published in May will be delivered in 2026.
This year, in fact, in the next
2026, yeah.
Okay. So we have legally binding targets, 2030, 2050, or 2050, and then the 2030 stops. So we have business, and you talked about money. We have businesses. So we've targets at one end. We have businesses ready to invest. We have opportunities around energy security, economic growth. Why has this been allowed to drift?
I completely reject the drift allegation.
2026.
And so what has drifted?
in 2021 and there was a 2020-30 target. It's 5 years in.
Okay. So if you're referring to, I think you've had evidence at the Economy Committee to transmission investments in their interconnector proposal as one of the investments that developers say they're ready to implement. In my opening remarks, I made reference to the fact that there are multiple different organisations in the private sector, amongst others, who have got interests in how this gets delivered. What the interconnector project would do would not be welcomed by many others in the renewable electricity sector. In designing these policies, as we've said in relation to the lessons to be learned from the RHI scheme, we need to make sure that we get these things right. We could, by rushing something like an interconnector policy, bake in permanently higher costs than are necessary for consumers. So we have got to make sure that we analyse all of these things in a degree of depth that is appropriate and proportionate to the amount of risks and the amounts of money that are involved in each of these things. Again, I will say we are going to produce, because I've made this point, we are not making this clear to people that they understand it sufficiently, and that's entirely on us in our communications approach. We will be making a policy statement from the Minister which will say what we're going to do each year between now and 2030 to deliver that renewable electricity target. And will specify the actions which will be taken and the sequence in which they will happen.
Tom Buchanan.
Thank you for being with us this afternoon. Just to stay on the action plan, the action plan's number have included actions aimed at providing financial support to assist the renewable energy economy. Has enough really been done in this area to help people and businesses in Northern Ireland to achieve these aims?
I think the straightforward answer to that probably is no. In the non-domestic sector, so businesses, we have the £40 million Energy and Resource Efficiency Programme, which a part of which was the Energy Efficiency Grant Scheme. We had launched that in 2024, and very large numbers of applications came in. And so obviously there's a huge appetite in businesses to invest in energy efficiency measures that saves them money and then also helps decarbonise their activities. Unfortunately, our capital budget is not sufficient to meet the demand for that scheme. There's a lot more we would like to be able to do to be able to support that, but unfortunately the budget is not available to the department to take that forward. I think on the domestic side of things, energy efficiency and heat, there's a huge demand out there for things like grant support for heat pumps and others. We have been working with the Department of Communities to coordinate the work that they are doing around fuel poverty and what they are now referring to as the Warm Healthy Home Scheme, so it will be the successor to Affordable Warmth Scheme, and our own domestic energy efficiency and heat programme, which will support then other households which are not low income. We need substantial sums of money to deliver that to the level at which we would like to see it delivered. There is a proposition in the draft investment strategy for Northern Ireland for up to £68 million per year to be invested in energy retrofit, but that investment strategy has not yet been agreed, so the money is not available to us to deliver it. So there's a lot more we would wish to do in that. Those programmes are significant because, on average, a electrified heating system or heat pump uses about a third of the energy overall than a fossil fuel fired system, gas or oil. So if we were able to shift even half of the properties off heating oil and gas, for example, and onto heat pumps, then that would save about a third of the current energy usage in the domestic sector. So these are very significant measures which are very important, but we need the money to be able to deliver them. I think that's the simple point. And so, yes, we would love to do a lot more in this. There's no question about it.
Okay. Your 2026 action plan notes that there will be a draft biomethane policy developed with support from the Interdepartmental Biomethane Group. To what extent will this increase the confidence of producers and investors in biomethane, and when do you expect that we will see the benefit of this increased production?
So one of the, well, it's just quite recently has just happened, but one of the most significant things is, Mr. Rogers mentioned the RHI scheme earlier. There's an allocation of money from the UK Treasury of about £33 million per year for decarbonised heat for non-domestic settings, so essentially for businesses. The RHI closure will use a part of that, but it will leave a reasonably substantial sum of money per year available for other uses. So we have secured the agreement of the Treasury that they will work with us on and accept from us a proposal around use of that money for biomethane in industrial settings. So that's the most recent thing that's happened just in the past couple of weeks. Then that allows us to have a funding stream which would allow us to develop with the industry a viable support system that will help industrial biomethane production. We want to be able to use that to set up a system that will not create an industry which is dependent on subsidy long term, but also will help grow the system, make it more effective and efficient, and then allow that biomethane to be injected into the gas system more generally in the longer term. But that's a significant move forward. Do you want to add that, Richard?
If I could just add that the reason it's important to work with DAERA is that the feedstock is an agricultural feedstock and a waste feedstock. There is also significant environmental implications in anaerobic digestion to produce biomethane, because at the bottom end you get a really useful gas that can then displace the fossil fuel gas, but you've got a liquid digestate, and we know that liquid digestate spread on the land. We've already got excess nutrients in and excess nutrients out, so we've got to deal with the excess nutrients, and that's why DAERA need to be deeply involved in this. So the composting of those nutrients and selling the compost off the island is the way forward, but we've got to do it in a sustainable, an environmentally sustainable way as well as a financially sustainable way. So we're working hard with DAERA to try and get to the answer that allows us to be able to use the available money, the AMI money that Treasury said they will look at a scheme. So like a lot of things in energy, it's very complex, and we need to make sure we don't end up with a perverse outcome in terms of the environment, but that we get something that is truly sustainable.
When can we expect to see the increase in this? When can we expect to see this in fruition, if you like?
So, we've promised that the group's outworkings will be a policy this year, but in terms of the AMI, the available money for a support scheme, once the RHI closure is resolved, which should be this year, the money will be available. So we've got to try and get this to market, so to speak, as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so some way down the road yet? But
No, I mean the money's becoming available this financial year. So, and again, members will know that we're over 100 million of available AMI that was never drawn down. It's lost forever. And every year we go by, there's maybe 10 to 15 million more. So, time is of the urgent necessary in this.
But in relation to, so specifically you want to know when we will start to see things happening. Right? So we need to get, just to talk through the sequence of what needs to happen, we need to get the Treasury to agree with our proposition and accept it. That could take up to a year, I think, on the basis of experience with other schemes that we've had to do more recently. We then need to have the system set up and operate. So I think realistically you're looking at 2028 for that.
And is such a proposition drafted with them at this stage, or is that
only an outline? So they will need to see a fully worked up, developed business case. So that will have to include the mechanism by which it will work and how it will be delivered, and all of those details will have to be worked out with the industry.
And it's interesting that you've made that point. Tom and I both represent the same constituency, and there's quite a number of such businesses that we have assisted one way or the other. With navigating some of the challenges that exist in the sector. In terms of the financial opportunities that are potentially forthcoming, how would you see that? Well, how have you put that on your proposal? Is it like a ROCs payment for people to incentivise them moving in that direction, or what way does that work?
So biomethane is more expensive than methane is, even at the current increased prices. So there needs to be a degree of subsidy to make it economically viable for the end users to take it. So there need to be some degree of subsidy sort of arrangement in place. What we don't want to end up with is a continual subsidy at that level in perpetuity. Otherwise, we will develop a sector which will then fall away after the AME money from this particular programme is no longer available. So we need to then think about how you incentivise increased efficiency in that process year on year. Now, Mr. Rogers mentioned the digestate problem. So you have these nutrients. We could, if as part of the technology gets developed, if you could produce that as a pellet form of fertiliser, it's a non-carbon fertiliser to start with, and many other parts of the world have deficit of nutrients, and especially phosphates and potassium. So we could export that. That could be a new export product for Northern Ireland, which helps them produce the financial model. But in order to make that work, we need to make sure the technology is actually viable and sustainable. That's why we need to work very closely with our colleagues in the Department of Agriculture to get this right. And we have very strong relationships with them, and we'll be driving that forward. Now we know that the funding stream potentially is available.
And aside from those opportunities, am I right in saying, and I'm learning about this as I go, there's opportunities potentially for the economy in terms of CO2 as well as a result of the process?
So the biogenic CO2, which is effectively when you convert biogas to biomethane that you can use in homes and businesses, then the biogenic CO2 is a valuable product and can be used, for example, in sustainable fuels such as e-methanol, for example. So the answer is yes, there's opportunity for biogenic CO2 because it's not fossil fuel CO2.
I just want to clarify something there. I asked you about a completion date on that energy plan, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you said it says they're actioned in 2026. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Can you show me the line in the action plan that says that?
I don't have it with me, but
I'll give you it if you want it.
Right,
Do you want me?
But it'll be in the introduction somewhere where it says these are the actions for 2026.
Yes, every year says that line.
No, but that's what
can
it
you
says.
Can you tell me where it says that those actions that are in your plan will be delivered in 2026?
So it's a semantic point. It's there.
No,
it
it's
says
not.
2026. Yeah.
No, it says 2026 in the date of the document.
No, it says in the paragraph that these actions are for 2026. And there's 7 months to go, 6.5 months to go now, and that's what our focus is. Once we get to January, it'll be 2027.
My question to you was the completion date of the actions on that. I'm asking you on that action plan to show me the line that has a specific completion date for that action plan.
It says the actions will be, talks about these actions are for 2026.
There's no completion date.
But once it gets to 2027, that won't be 2026.
Does not have a completion date.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been made. I'll move on now to Stephen Dunn.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, folks, for your presentation and answers so far. Just turning to some of the issues around governance, oversight and accountability as well. And some of the governance arrangements were described in the Audit Office report as complex and ineffective in addressing a number of strategy implementation issues. And I suppose I'm keen to establish, why did the Energy Strategy Oversight Group fail to identify and correct weaknesses in both planning and delivery and also reporting?
In the first year, so I've already, like I said in response, maybe it was to one of the Chair's questions, that we recognise that the first year's action plan, it could have been tightened up substantially in retrospect in the first year. So that was, at the time, it was called the Energy Strategy Programme Board, was responsible for that. Now, there is evidence in the minutes that they had examined the actions and there was some challenge on them, but we have learned from that kind of experience. It's now called the Energy Strategy Oversight Group. The change of name, I think, doesn't really, it's not that material to what the function of the group is. It does challenge the actions. It asks questions about feasibility. It wants to get detail of how they're going to be implemented, and then we get reports at that group about how they are progressing against those. I would never say that we've got any system perfectly in operation. We certainly learned some lessons from what the Audit Office found, and we've been applying that and how the material is provided to the Energy Strategy Oversight Group, and how the discussions are recorded in order to give transparency about what's actually happening. I would say that, in my experience, cross-department, and I was here maybe 18 months ago talking about the skills strategy. I got a lot of questions about cross-departmental collaboration. It is, and it can be, a challenging thing to deliver, but this is probably one of the best examples that I've seen in my career of collaboration across departments. We've just been talking about the work we're doing with the Department of Agriculture on biomethane, but you see that across a number of different departments, with the Department for Communities around home energy efficiency and affordable warmth and fuel poverty and so forth, the Department of Infrastructure around some transport related issues. So we are working very collaboratively with a lot of departments, and that's sometimes difficult to capture in the documentation, but it is probably one of the most positive aspects of the way this strategy is being delivered.
Okay.
Sorry, if I could just add to that, the report does cover the period of time between the energy strategy document being produced and then the beginning of the implementation, and then there was a change of the governance. So if there's a sequence of events, and I think the complexity can appear from the fact that there were different governance setups for those aspects of it. Yeah. In terms of the energy strategy document, there was significant engagement and lots of groups set up to make sure that everybody had their say in that document, and I think the Audit Office has said that document itself was well produced and it was very effective. Then it moved straight into from a project to a programme, and the intention behind that was to ensure that there was absolutely no gap between the production of the document and the beginning of the delivery. At a point down the line, then it was reviewed and it was simplified, and I think again the Audit Office report has welcomed the fact that it was simplified, and it is now simply an energy strategy oversight group. Below that there's an action plan working group, where the action plan leads nominated by the grade 3s on the energy strategy oversight group actually nominate a delivery lead, and that working group meets every 2 months and reports back to the oversight group, and then obviously there's all the policy teams on the ground. So the actual the structure is fairly simple and straightforward now, and I think it works really well because everybody knows what their roles are in that.
Yeah, and that review then was on the back of the Audit Office report. What you've talked about, those new workings then, new governance arrangements?
That was done in 2023.
Oh, wow, that was, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Just going back to the ESOG issue then, so who had the authority to delay, change or abandon actions? And we're keen to know why were such decisions sometimes taken without formal approval by the ESOG body?
The decisions will be taken by the departments which are responsible for delivering those actions. It's one of the features of our system of government that each department is separate and operates under the direction and control of its own minister. So if there are priorities in a different department which mean an action can't be taken forward, there's no authority for anybody in the Department for the Economy, in the Energy Strategy Oversight Group or elsewhere to prevent that change from happening. Mm-hmm. What we attempt to do is avoid those actions falling off the list by working together collaboratively if we can, but ultimately the authority rests with the departments responsible for delivering the action.
One of the other issues just from the Audit Office report recommended a review of the governance arrangements. Just to clarify, can you confirm has this been carried out yet, and what did it conclude, and when can we ultimately see improvements in those governance arrangements?
What we've been doing since the Audit Office report was published is we have been working to implement each of those recommendations, and we've done significant work, for example, in developing the reporting of the statistics, the metrics, etc. So we've produced a dashboard on that. We now have a statistical report that's published every year, and we have also then basically made sure that there is more comprehensive documentation of what is discussed, the fact that there's those links with the climate change information, etc. And so we've been working all of those things through in the recommendation, and we also have a specific process whereby the Energy Strategy Oversight Group work through that feasibility assessment, the SMART targets, all of that, and that's documented, and then that's actually delegated down to the delivery lead, and they're told this is what you operate to. As you're progressing this through, we have upped the number of reporting cycles, so the working group reports every 2 months to the oversight group, which gives the group more opportunity to spot things that are going off track, and to have that conversation around the table about whether this is going to be delivered, whether that's going to be an issue or not, etc. So we've been introducing all of that, and one of the things we're doing as well is the policy statement that we're producing in the coming months is going to have the milestones in it, and that was a major issue in the Audit Office report. So it's going to have the milestones in it, and then what it's going to do is it's going to work through into next year's action plan. So as well as being the 1 year milestones that are going to be delivered by the end of that year, we're also going to have the milestones for the years following, and then each year those milestones are going to be refreshed and hopefully will be more detailed each year as it gets closer and closer to them. So once we get that produced, at that point we will have introduced all of the enhanced governance, and we will be seeking the review just to confirm to ourselves that we have actually implemented all of that properly, and that there are no further improvements that we can make at this point anyway.
Okay, thank you. And just final point then, just on a wider point, you mentioned some other examples and so on around the UK and beyond as well. So just looking a bit of thoughts around Scotland amended its climate legislation in 2024. The Climate Change Committee advised the 2030 target was no longer achievable or credible when they repealed their 75% reduction target for 2030 for a number of reasons, I think, including that feature of unachievable targets and the 2030 bottleneck, for example. And I suppose one of the key findings around that was the targets needed to be realistic and also affordable for consumers, importantly. Should Northern Ireland consider that? Do any of you feel?
I'm going to decline to answer that question because that's very much a political point rather than an administrative one.
But in terms of your professional and technical backgrounds and expertise on energy and ultimately cost for consumers is something paramount for me as an elected representative, and that is it.
The energy strategy also places the interests of consumers right at its very heart, and the whole purpose and vision of the energy strategy is net zero affordable energy for Northern Ireland. But on the question of whether or not the Assembly should change its legislative targets, I am not going to answer that question. Mm-hmm. It's not appropriate for me to answer that question.
Seen the impact of them, on major infrastructure projects, for example, the A5 and other key projects that are impacting the economy in Northern Ireland. So I think it is a very serious discussion. We've seen what Scotland have done, and appreciate it's moving away from the specifics of the what the report under review today. But I think it's a very important issue, certainly.
Yep, thank you, Stephen. I understand why you can't answer that question, so that's entirely, but you can't delve into policy-related political questioning, so that's fine. Okay, I'll move on to John Burrows, MLA.
Thank you. In contrast to the position in England where a legacy IT risk assessment framework has operated for several years, there's a lack of understanding as to the extent of legacy IT systems being used here, Northern Ireland Civil Service. What is being done to address this?
So is this for the energy strategy?
The wrong one. Oh, sorry, walking late from the Secretary of State's meeting. Got the question wrong one. Sorry.
The Department of Finance question.
Yeah. Sorry. Got you now. Recognise the department cannot deliver the energy strategy with effective collaboration with other departments. For example, we learned in a previous inquiry that the Department for Education continues to undertake construction work without an eye to future efficiency, energy efficiency, only for retrofitting work to be required later at an increased cost. What is the department doing to achieve better cross-departmental working and better value for money for Northern Ireland as a whole?
Okay, so I think I mentioned in response to Mr. Dunn, I think it was, or Mr. Buchanan, that the energy strategy is probably one of the best examples of collaboration I've seen in my career across multiple government departments. So we try to make sure that we all can agree actions which will serve the purposes of multiple different departments or agencies, that we will do things and we can align what our objectives are as far as possible. Having said that, we can't have any meaningful degree of control over specific actions which are taken by, in this case, the Department of Education, for example, and its building standards and so forth. What we can do is encourage people to take advantage of the support systems are there, and also I think with the building regulations, which I believe are currently sitting with the executive, it would be one way in which across the whole system something like that example that you just cited wouldn't happen again.
Okay, why did it take almost 3 years after publication of the energy strategy to progress against the headline targets to be formally measured and reported?
So specifically that relates to the energy savings target. So the energy savings target, or the figures that relate to it, are created by collating together information from about 10 different sources, because they relate to 10 separate interventions which will produce energy savings. Those are figures produced by several different organisations who are responsible for collating information. Some of that's through Office of National Statistics, and some of it is NISRA here in Northern Ireland, and some of it is other organisations like, for example, Department of Energy Security and Net Zero in the UK. So we have to wait till that information can be collated. For the 2022 action plan, the first time that any information in relation to that was available was 2024. So unfortunately it was almost 3 years after the strategy was published before the first figures were available to report on for that particular measure. We do have, more frequent information available on the other targets, in specifically the renewable energy consumption target, which is produced quarterly and has been since 2014.
Yeah, 3 years wouldn't be really acceptable, would it? I mean, I know you've outlined some challenges and reasons, but
it's a pretty significant target of the strategy is energy savings. You need to have robust information on which to assess whether or not you're moving in the right direction on that. It is not, I might surprise the committee learns, not that uncommon in economic and energy related statistics to be working with figures which are potentially up to 2 years after the event. So even in relation to, for example, issues like trade and exports, our figures are significantly delayed before they are available to us. It's not ideal. We have produced now, I think Anne-Marie mentioned it earlier, a statistical report in relation to our progress against the metrics in the energy strategy, and obviously we're looking at how we can develop our data sources to give us additional information as well. But on that key headline target in the strategy about energy savings, we need that robust information that is reliable, and that unfortunately takes longer than we would like for it to appear.
And I would add that we actually have a public-facing dashboard now that is updated as soon as any new information comes in. So that that 15.6% figure on the energy savings target is updated on the dashboard for anybody in the public to see, and that might get updated next month as a new figure comes in. So we're now on a rolling basis where there's much better information, even though quite a lot of it is lagged.
okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. We'll now move to. Is it okay to proceed at this stage?
Yeah.
Just need a break around. Okay, we'll move to Colin Gildernew. Okay.
Yep, thank you. I suppose a comment first and then a couple of questions. Just around the biomethane, I just want to flag up the fact that in my own constituency in the past number of weeks there's been a serious leak at a biomethane production facility. That's currently being investigated by NIEA. And I don't want to dwell too much on it in light of that, but all I want to do is say by way of a comment that we cannot build a green future based on unsafe, unacceptable or unsustainable practices. So it's key that what we're doing meets the needs of communities as well as the economy, and that smells or risks or gas leaks are addressed before we start to roll out any of these. So that's a comment.
Could I just say something in response to that comment?
Yeah.
Since I am also responsible for the Health and Safety Executive, biomethane is subject to the same gas safety regulations as fossil fuel gas is. So any issues, there's no question of us rushing stuff which is not safe. It is subject to the same safety requirements.
Yeah, so, well, I'm flagging up, I've never had any issues raised with that, so it would seem to be problematic. It's probably a management issue, but it needs addressed, because people need to have confidence that the technologies or the systems are sustainable for communities. The other one is, I visited in my constituency again a development this week of houses being built for social homes. I'm told that they're not just these houses are not just carbon neutral, but they're actually carbon positive. They're generating electricity, and that the average heat and electric cost for the year is estimated at £100 a year, delivering significant value for the tenants and for the economy and everything else. And that they have a lifespan of 100 years minimum. That's the most they can go to. And my question around that is, are we moving quickly enough to adopt new technologies in building? Because I'm told these don't cost any more than current methods. There's almost a perception that it'd be very expensive, and that's why we're not moving quicker. So are we adopting new technologies quickly enough in the building to future-proof?
So, I suppose there are two parts to the response to that question. So you attended a new build development and social housing. So new builds will be subject to building regulations. I mentioned earlier that there are new upgraded building regulations which are currently sitting with the executive for their consent. That would start to apply some of those new technology requirements in all properties. So things like, for example, heat pumps, solar panels and battery storage, for example, would start to become standard additions to
all of which are in this one.
New build property. I would say, I think it would be fair to say that the social housing sector is more advanced than the private sector is in this regard in terms of new builds, but as the building regulations come in, then those standards will be uplifted for all sectors. Then the second part is relation to existing properties and retrofit. So we currently build, not enough houses per year, but somewhere in the region of 6,000 houses per year. There are 825, I think, 1,000 houses, household properties in Northern Ireland. So obviously, if we're going to make progress on these new technology updates, that involves the retrofitting process. I mentioned earlier the Warm Healthy Homes scheme, which the Department for Communities is rolling out as a replacement for affordable warmth. That will be for low-income households, and our own domestic energy efficiency and heat programme, which will dovetail into that for other people. That kind of financial support, if the money is available to deliver those schemes, will be very significant in encouraging people to adopt those new technologies, because that will make significant inroads into our energy efficiency savings.
Could I just add that our Minister announced the smart meter design plan recently, and there is a massive opportunity to tackle fuel poverty in lower income homes, and it can be led by the housing executive and the housing associations. The prize, if you like, is that NIE procure this year and next, and that the rollout into the best part of 900,000 homes happens over 3 years, and it's led in the lower income homes, because the opportunity is as you describe it. It's where what people pay today for electricity, if the landlord adds solar panels, a battery and a heat pump, we can, with the smart meter, we can see service providers providing the heating at the same price that they're currently paying for just the power. So heating on power for the same price as just the power. That's the prize. And you're seeing it now in real life, because people are building homes in advance of the building regulations. But we should be doing it, because that will really help a lot of people who need the help.
Another project you'll be familiar with is Southwest College in Enniskillen. They have a control panel in the foyer there, which shows how much electricity they've used. So my first visit to it was in April last year, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon they'd used £5 worth of power to run the building all day, and that's a very large building.
These houses I visited aren't even connected to the electric, and they're charging the batteries for the workers in the site, and they like the lights and everything working in them. Phenomenal. I think there's huge potential there. Okay, thanks for that. I'm going on then to the updated performance figures information you sent to us last week. There's some inconsistencies when compared to the report that we received, the NIAO report in 2025. I want to work my way through those. The baseline figure for measurement of the 25% energy savings from buildings and industry appears to have changed from 8,000 gigawatt hours to 6,920. What's the reason for that change?
That was a change that was made by the UK government department responsible. The 8,000, whenever the energy strategy was set, was the baseline figure that had been reported by, I think it was Department of Energy Security and Net Zero at that point. Then subsequently, after the energy strategy was published, they said that the baseline actually was lower, because they recalculated it, and so that's why the baseline has changed, and that's why the target number has changed, so the 25% figure. I suppose just to provide a reassurance, is not like a massive change. The figures I sent last week said we had achieved 15.6% of this revised target. If we were still working to the old target, it would be 13.8%. So lower, obviously, because it's a proportion of a higher denominator. But that's we're still making headway towards achieving that target.
So why did the British government reduce what's the basis for them to reduce it?
It must have been the revised our calculations. This is not a unique occurrence, and one of the challenges we have with our measurement system quite often is that there are retrospective changes as figures get adjusted. So it happens to economic growth figures, to inflation figures, to unemployment figures, to everything. They are revised by the statisticians as new additional information comes available.
And they will change again, unfortunately. We just have to live with that.
Okay, well then there's a 24% increase in the size of the green economy now being claimed. That figure has gone down from 1.58 billion in the NIAO report to 1.5 billion now. So how's that a 24% increase?
It was 1.1 billion, wasn't it?
1.51 now, previously 1.58.
At the beginning it was 1.1.
Yes.
I'm looking at the report here. Chapter 16 of the report says that the size of the low carbon and renewable energy economy was reported as 1.58 billion turnover compared to a target of 2 billion, and the figures you gave us recently state 1.51.
Confidence interval. It's a statistical survey by
Yeah.
UKG.
Just to explain how that number is calculated, that's a statistical survey of businesses undertaken by, I think it's by the Office of National Statistics. And so it's not the entirety of all of the sectors. So what happens will be they will produce figures based on that sample size and extrapolate from it. So it's a standard enough sort of process for official statistics. There'll be a confidence interval with that because it's a sample size. But the 24% increase, I think, refers to the difference between the date of the strategy and the date that we're currently at, not between the last reported point. So in 2021, the baseline figure is 1.1 billion. Now it's 1.5.
Okay, well, given so that there's a lot of moving parts within that, a lot of changes, do you understand why it may be difficult at times for people to have confidence in the figures when all of those things are changing? Does that create a crisis of confidence that you find difficult to manage, and are there better ways of doing it?
I think they need to understand what these figures are and how they should be most appropriately be used. Whilst you have to be careful by comparison with one quarter, for example, to the next quarter, or one sixth monthly report to the next sixth monthly report. What you need to see over a number of years would be the trend going in the right direction overall. I think that's most significant. By comparison to my previous job in Land and Property Services, which is very much an operational business, we had real-time data. It was quite precise. You could use that to manage performance in a much more fine-tuned kind of way. These metrics are not really suitable for the same kind of performance management in that sort of sense. What we need to then look at are the additional sets of metrics that we've got, and then to monitor our delivery of the things that are in the action plans and the other policies that need to be taken. I think I said a couple of times earlier in the course of the meeting what we have not done, and this is why there might be a lack of confidence in our progress towards achieving these targets. What we have not done is explain clearly the sequence of things that need to happen and then how they will interlink together, and then how they will produce the outcomes that we're looking for. We have 80 separate actions, taking out the rollover actions and the ones which are duplicated from one action plan to the next, 80 separate actions in the action plans that we've produced to date. It's a very difficult thing to map out how they would all link together, so we need to have a simplified explanation of the core actions that we need to take in, for example, domestic heating, in energy and business use, in the energy production sector and transport and so forth, which will allow us then to be able to say, this is how we're going to achieve those targets.
Yeah, because if you're providing figures to a lay audience, they need to be understandable by, not everyone can maybe understand that's what's behind some of the changes. So what assurance then can you provide that the revised approach to metrics and data is robust enough to support timely corrective action between now and 2030?
Okay, again, to go to the point about corrective action first, again, like I say, this is not like an operational system like they had in land and property services, where I could look at the information that was available and then take management action to make adjustments and correct course. We don't have control over all of the factors which impinge on those indicators, unfortunately, or they're not amenable to management action in the same kind of way as if I was running a service of that nature. So we aren't able to use these metrics as a way of adjusting course and taking corrective action, but it does tell us if the things that we are doing are helping us move in the right way. We have much more, I suppose, much more detailed and substantive statistical reports produced. There have been reviews of statistical methodology of, for example, the renewable energy consumption figures, which well, I saw a commentary from some stakeholders in the industry suggesting that was manipulating the figures in our favour. In fact, it actually makes it more difficult for us to achieve them, not easier. And so therefore you can place much more reliance on the fact that that is a robust number, and it demonstrates genuine progress. And we have a very strong capability in the department in our Analytical Statistical Services division, and they are working alongside us to produce the kind of metrics and reports that will give us a clear picture of how we're progressing.
You went back to corrective, I'll go back to assurance. Are you able to provide that assurance?
That we are able to respond and,
yes,
and make things in the right way. I think that the large volume of data and information and evidence that we have got would give plenty of assurance that we are doing the right things and are progressing in the right way.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Hum. We'll now go to Gareth Wilson.
Thank you. I suppose just, Jenny, I know a few of my points have already been covered, so I'll develop a few more as I go here, but just generally kicking off my contributions here, would you feel realistically that progress and the reason, or part of the reason why you're sitting here with this type of report is because of the overreach of these proposals versus the realistic implementation of them?
Well, overreach or ambition, I suppose. Yeah, so we have a lot of very ambitious actions in the action plans. I think as the chair commented in his opening remarks, there's quite a sizable challenge set by the Climate Change Act in 2022. And so we have got to be ambitious about what we attempt to achieve in delivery of this strategy. The targets have been set for us, not least in the renewable electricity in legislation. So I don't think a conservative approach would help get us moving in the right kind of direction. I think that we have learned since the early days of delivering this strategy and the production of the action plans that we need to be a lot more robust about what we include in an action plan and whether it is actually feasible to deliver it in the year that's expected. There is an optimism tendency, I think, sometimes in saying what we're going to be able to achieve in the next 12 months, which is not always going to be matched by the reality of what's possible to do in the time that's available to us. And so we have definitely learned from that. I think that there's a huge amount of work to be done. I said at the outset that we had delivered a lot on this. A lot of the things that we've had to do have been, I don't want to make this sound like it's jargon, but we need to do some enabling things in order to allow the more substantive actions to be taken forward, which in and of themselves may not make a difference on any of the individual targets, but unless we do them, we won't be able to then deliver the rest. So one example, I think it's a pretty clear-cut one, is the way that the grid connection policy operated was a significant financial barrier to some renewable electricity projects. It also has wider benefits to households, to businesses across the board, but specifically if you wanted to put a wind turbine up and you needed to get investment made in the grid, that could be quite substantial in terms of costs. It could run into tens and possibly hundreds of thousands of pounds, depending on the location and the nature of it. So one of the changes we have done as part of the energy strategy is a change to grid connection policy, which socialises some of those costs and then removes some of those financial barriers. That in itself won't make any difference to any of the targets, but it is a very important thing to have got in place to get us started. So there are lots of actions in the early stages to deliver this strategy which would be like that. But I think I've said this a couple of times now, we've got to be quite clear about how each of the things that we are doing links towards delivering those targets and why they are important to do.
Personally, I'm not surprised that it's quagmirish in its appearance. I mean, I can't see that improving any, to be perfectly honest, because once we've moved away, and I'm passionate with this, once we've moved away from a UK-wide contribution-based response to this, which really does take account of our unique circumstances here and collaborates then with England, Scotland, Wales productively and, you know, with targets in mind that are achievable, I think you'll be back here quite a few times. That's my view, based on missed targets, and that's just my personal opinion. But and I'll flesh that out further in terms, you were talking about turbines. I done 10 years in the local planning department and council, and I would like your view on planning policy in terms of renewables. I don't think they're up to speed. You spoke about policy change and the need for that. It's no way responsive enough to meet targets that you've set, I don't feel, and I feel your department then doesn't have enough say in that, I would say, in terms of how planning policy is discussed and debated and implemented in the 11 local councils. And I've seen that. I've seen turbines and various other renewable measures severely delayed. So I would like to know what your response is to that. How do you see that element of progress being implemented, you know, whenever there's only so many instructions you can issue as a department? How do you beat that?
Okay, well, just one thing before I get into answering your question directly. You said you referred to these as our targets. Of course, the target was set by the Assembly. It wasn't set by the department. I think it's important to bear that in mind all the time. It's not something arbitrarily that we have.
I do feel that's an issue. I feel you do treat it as a political issue, and you've said that. Mm-hmm. And then I feel it falls down because the rubber hits the road departmentally, technically, financially, common sense basis, and I think that's where the wheels come off this cart, to be honest, but that's my personal view. But I'd like your response on the planning issue.
The planning issue. Okay, so the revised strategic planning policy statement was agreed by the executive, I think, in January of this year, and it was published in April. So it is now out. That makes a number of important changes to how planning policy deals with. One of which was the safety radius, I suppose, around a turbine, which was previously set at 10 times the radius or diameter of the turbine blades, but is now standardised at, I think it's 1 kilometre around it. Now, why that's significant was if you had an existing turbine site and you wanted to do what's called repowering of that turbine, which is basically to make it generate more electricity by making it a bit bigger, that you wouldn't be able to do that on more than 90% of the existing turbines in Northern Ireland because of that radius. But the change in policy then allows those turbines to be repowered. So that's a significant change in the policy. There are, however, other planning policies which then start to create some challenges for us. So one is that most of the suitable sites that are available remaining in Northern Ireland are in areas of outstanding natural beauty, where it will be difficult to get planning permission to put a wind turbine or any other renewable generator up. So when we have to look at what the alternatives to that would be, since most of the viable public sector or private sector sites have been taken, and that one of those things is to look at substantial holdings of public sector land in Northern Ireland. Now, from my previous job, and I set up the government land and property database when I was on Chief Executive of Land and Property Services. And now it gives us a very clear overview of what public land is available and where it's located. And it's all detailed, mapped out in some degree of detail. And so we're working with the Forest Service and Northern Ireland Water, who are the two largest landowners in Northern Ireland, about how we can use their land, and it appeared in a couple of the action plans, how we can use their land as sites for renewable generation capacity. After that, you're into how the planning system operates and its efficiency and how fast you can get decisions taken. That's not an area of our responsibility. A lot of that's now devolved to local authorities, to the councils, to make the planning decisions, and obviously they are the planning decision maker, and so it's beyond our capability to give them directions on that kind of stuff. What we do, however, and have done at the suggestion of the Department for Infrastructure, is talk to councils about the strategy, why the renewables are necessary, what we need to try to achieve with it, and get into discussion with them about how we can address some of the delays and backlogs in the system, and what we might be able to do to make sure those projects go through the system faster.
Then moving on to the issue of home heating specifically, because I know we have an not an over-reliance, it's a reality, you know, for rural Northern Ireland. My constituency is no different than Uri and Armagh. In my opinion, and in my mind, there are huge costs associated for an average homeowner who's in a 50-plus-year-old house to embrace energy efficient, up-to-date heating mechanisms such as a heat pump in an old drafty structure. And yes, you might say it's going to lower your bills, but it's going to be expensive to install, and that house is still going to be drafty and old, so it's going to take more money to make it more airtight. Then you're going to introduce an electric source, you know, of heating, and you're going to eliminate ventilation to an extent, and then you're going to have to replicate that by forced air or some other method that will by virtue then cool the house again. I'm just wondering how, in all reality, do you see that working effectively and affordably initially? And incentivisation is clearly, you've mentioned it, that's going to be a key part of it all. But, you know, to what cost? I mean, where does it end, or where does it start, maybe is the best?
So what's called the whole house approach to these kinds of energy efficiency measures has been like a pretty common feature of the approach to this sort of stuff since, well, at least the middle of the last decade anyway, when the Affordable Warmth Scheme was launched in 2016, I think that was. So the idea there is that you don't simply do one part of that. There was something called a Warm Home Scheme previously, and that was primarily focused at loft insulation and other straightforward measures. Cost about £1,000 per property on average for the ones we supported. When you moved to the Affordable Warmth Scheme, the cost went up to closer to £10,000 per property, because at that point you were looking at the heating system, the windows, the loft insulation, the cavity wall insulation, the draft exclusion, some of the things you've mentioned there. I think the only way for these things to work effectively, especially in older properties, and to be honest, don't even have to be that old. My house is 24 years old and probably wouldn't be suitable for.
I'm passing a development that's just started, and there's fibre wool in the cavity, and that's a scandal in my view, in a 100 mil cavity.
So building regulations will address some of that, but what requires to be done, and put the right insulation into the new build properties. But even relatively young properties will have to have some work done to them to move them onto heat pumps.
Who pays for that?
So this is where our support schemes come in. Now, we will only be able to deliver those if we get the capital funding required from whatever source we can get it, whether that's the investment strategy allocates that, or the executive's able to make that money available to us. What we need to have is a kind of a grant support scheme for homeowners or for householders. For low-income householders, that will be the Warm Home Scheme, the Warm Healthy Homes Scheme, which the Department for Communities is going to introduce to replace affordable warmth. For everybody else, it will be the Domestic Energy Efficiency and Heat Programme that we're currently working up. And those two things will...
That means tested, do you think?
The second one. No, the affordable warmth scheme is the one for low-income households, so we would need to work through the detail of all that in the consultation process, which is about to start quite soon. But the idea would be there would be grant support available for homeowners to allow them to invest in that kind of property. Now, obviously, we need to think about this. My house, as I said, is 24 years old. It's an oil-fired boiler. It's not going to last many more years, I would suspect. On the law of averages, it'll have to be replaced. So I'll have a decision to make about whether I replace that oil boiler with an air source heat pump, for example. And as technology advances, those things will become, different options will become available.
Yeah, and in terms of the likes of the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, and the aspects of this policy puts a fairly considerable onus on agriculture and that in this whole system. What collaboration or what joined up thinking are you promoting or envisaging with that department, to deliver on some of your objectives?
So I can point to two things specifically. One's the biomethane that we talked about earlier on there. Now, we have the issue of nutrients and runoff into Loch May and the blue-green algae that is partly a contributor to. So there's an opportunity for us jointly between departments to work to come up with a solution that will fix two problems. Essentially, one for us about the energy transition, and then the other one for the Department of Agriculture about the nutrients. So that's an area where we'll be working together very closely. In response to Mr. Buchanan, we talked about that in a bit of detail. I think the second one where we've been working very closely is on the geothermal energy demonstrator. So I mentioned that one of those projects is at Greenmount College. That's the deep geothermal project that's being delivered there. That's the kind of project that could produce large amounts of energy, and they've got greenhouses there which they use to produce horticultural products. It certainly would be something that the two departments working together would be able to get significant benefits out of. So there are several projects specifically that we're working on jointly. I'd say the biomethane project also deals with household brown bin waste as another solution, or another issue that we could provide a solution to. So that brown bin waste could be used as part of the feedstock for the biomethane production process as well as the slurry. And again, that's a Department of Agriculture responsibility.
And just lastly, I suppose focusing on the RHI issue, I suppose rather than, it was focused on heat, but it created a chill factor, you could say, out in the wider community, and there's a scepticism out there of government operated grant schemes. How does your department plan on reversing that scepticism into enthusiasm? Because that's a big challenge, I think.
We can only do that by demonstrating effective delivery, I think, and that the things are actually working as they should do. That will then address the legacy of the problems. If there was to be any indication that we were making the same kinds of mistakes or repeating the process, then people would rightly be very sceptical of us. We can only really get that enthusiasm, I think, if we are able to show that we're delivering these things effectively, which is why quite a few times I've said that we need to take sufficient amounts of time and put a proportionate amount of effort into making sure we do these things correctly. They all involve substantial sums of money, potentially tie consumers into quite high costs if they're not done correctly, and there are lots of competing interests who would like us to do things in particular ways. So we need to really do the analysis and the detailed policy work to make sure we're effective.
If I could just add a concluding point, Chair, just come back to the point you were talking about at the beginning. I think it was the Chief Executive of the UR said to the Economy Committee yesterday that without being at 48% renewable electricity prices would be, and I think he used a figure of 50-60% higher. So the renewable electricity is putting a downward pressure on prices. That's why we need to keep increasing the proportion, because we've had 7 energy crises over the past 50 years. We've had 2 in the last 4 years, and they aren't going to stop. So it's about having control over what we pay. And all the points you make are really valid. And it's a question of getting on with the delivery and keeping up with the technology so we can deliver cost-effective solutions to all the things you talked about.
Thank you. Okay, David Honeyford.
Right, so I'm looking at the Chamber report that came out in energy. Okay, so the committee got obviously a report given to us. They speak for the business community and the stakeholders here within the sector. But were officials involved in that report, and do you have any thoughts on the report?
No, we weren't involved in the production of the report. That's very much the Chamber's own. Now, I'd say it does in a couple of places identify, that it recognises, industry recognises the challenges that we're facing. Quite a lot of the points that are in the report, I have discussed those with the chief executive in the past. So she mentioned the opportunities for secondments into the department to work in particular policy areas where we need that commercial expertise to help us work through the detail of how some of these schemes or policies would be implemented. And there's not an awful lot in it that I would disagree with, I don't think. I'm not sure. No, I think it's pretty much in line with what we know needs to be done.
So business talk about the urgency, and that's sort of one of the things, and the feeling that they're sitting ready and government or department is moving slow than industry would like. Is that fair enough comment?
It's regular feedback that we get that for example, the gas sector would like us to move a lot faster on biomethane. The renewable generators would like us to move a lot faster on things like the support scheme for renewable electricity. There's no question that lots of parts of business would like to see us move faster on some of these policies. We have responded to all of that kind of feedback because we now have regular engagements on many of the issues in the energy strategy with working groups set up by the CBI, for example. And we are developing those working relationships, and I think that's been a very productive thing. I would reflect on the fact that since I've come into the department, one of the things that was very evident to me whenever I first arrived, it was quite insular, and then we're looking at this just as a general observation. Many people in business would say they have no real idea who does what in the department and what we're working on, and that's something we've spent quite a bit of effort trying to address over the past few years. And I think if you were to ask business representative organisations, they say the access and the engagement they're getting from the department is substantially improved over the past couple of years.
You mentioned the renewable electricity guarantee price. It's in the action plan for this year, and the reason I'm pushing you on that, there's no actions in the action plan or no accountability on it, is the wording says the actions for 26 are. That's what it says, right? But in 25 it said the actions for 25 are, and the final design and terms and conditions were in last year's. But how can a business or how can investors have confidence to move forward with investments whenever they haven't seen it?
The executive, the minister sent a paper on the renewable electricity price guarantee bill to the executive last week. Right, it was not agreed for discussion on the agenda for today's meeting, unfortunately, but the bill is prepared. The detailed design work has been done, and then a bit like the way we approached it with, for example, the RHI scheme, when the bill is in the Assembly, then we'll move forward with the detail of the design and the regulations which will flow from the primary legislation thereafter, and there will be a lot of engagement, especially with the Economy Committee, about what the detail of that looks like. But at this point, we need the Executive to approve the bill for its introduction to the Assembly to allow us to move forward.
What's the final date that bill could be introduced to be coming forward in this mandate?
Well, we can't now achieve committee stage before the summer recess, but we could achieve first reading.
Okay. And what can I ask what the blockage was at the Executive? No? That's fine.
Assuming that they have a busy agenda.
Okay. No problem. Thank you.
Okay. Members, any other questions you'd like to raise or contempt? Okay. Thank you for being with us and for taking quite a number of those questions and for answering them in detail. I know that on your last visit we got off to a bumpy start. Hopefully the road is now clear, and that we can expect to see clear evidence that lessons are being learned as you've outlined, and that the department can carry out the important role of leading a strategy that ensures Northern Ireland meets its obligations and on these important energy issues. There's a lot going on. There's certainly a lot of information today. We do appreciate you sharing that with us, and we will be engaging further with the department, and we'd hope that you can continue updating us on any progress that is made. Before we end the evidence session, Doreen, have you anything to say, CNAG? No? Okay, thank you. Stuart?
Just a brief comment, Chair. I think from a Department of Finance perspective, it was quite a technical session, but nonetheless, I think very important exchange around value for money.
Yeah.
And I think that was particularly helpful. I know the Public Accounts Committee have consistently brought focus on issues of preventative spend, and I think we see that, and certainly Mr. Snowden's comments about the investment in the government estate and the 7-year payback aspect. So I think the report is very helpful, and I think the recommendations that will flow will also be helpful given some of the public expenditure decisions that lie ahead. So very helpful indeed, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Mr. Snowden, Ms. McCann, and Mr. Rogers. We appreciate your time for taking our questions. Okay, thank you, Stuart, also, and thanks to Doreen, the CNAG and the Audit Office for their help and support. Members, if agreed, we'll now move on to closed session.